You know, it's these ones from Jesus that make me really want to say, he said these things, okay? These are squirmish words for some. And they are also words that come to some and they go, finally, someone's saying it. So, this good news is complicated, I think, in how we experience what Jesus is saying here. A necessary or perhaps unnecessary disclaimer, I don't know. But we've got to take what he says seriously. In today's gospel, Jesus stands on a Palestinian prairie with crowds waiting on bated breath with what he has to say. And he sits on that prairie and he flips the world on its head. Think of the things the uber rich, the uber wealthy and famous say about themselves. I'm talking about what the CEO of a Fortune 500 company says when interviewed at a conference about how they achieved their wealth. Or think about the Grammy Award winner on stage. Or a Super Bowl champion interviewed on the field. Or a politician from the victory podium on election night. What sentiments can often be heard? That they're blessed. And or that they worked so hard to get where they are. And in most cases, there's an implication that there's either some divine destiny to their fortune, or at least that they're deserving of their fortune. That their fortune and their victory is just and it is good. And that may well be true. In some cases, if not many cases. And I'm not necessarily contesting that. I just want you to hold it in view. I'm simply emphasizing how CEOs, politicians, celebrities, and pro athletes, at their moment of glory, frame that glory. They are often self-aggrandizing the blessed, deserved, destined nature of their good fortune. Again, that their fortune is just and it is good. This makes me think of the German sociologist, Max Weber, who wrote this in his work, The Protestant Ethic, and I quote, "The fortunate man is seldom satisfied with the fact of being fortunate. Beyond this, he needs to know that he has a right to that good fortune. He wants to be convinced he deserves it. Good fortune thus wants to be legitimate fortune." End quote. In other words, good fortune often wants to be and is framed as blessed, blessed. And again, in some cases, that might be just fine to do. I'm not necessarily contesting that. I'm simply saying all of this to contrast sentiments of good fortune with sentiments about the poor, the suffering, and the outcast. We don't often view such circumstances as blessed or blessed. We don't often view such circumstances with the marking of divine favor, do we? In fact, we often offer the poor, the suffering, and the downtrodden different sentiments. They often get our avoidance, our pity, our judgment, or apropos to the text, our woe. I don't think I'm wrong. The suffering are often ignored or avoided. The poor are often blamed for their poverty, and the outcast is often ridiculed for their difference. So, fair or not, I don't think I'm wrong when I say we often hear a consistent proposition about the rich and the famous. They're blessed. And we hear and see other things in relation to the poor and the afflicted. Woe to them for their station in life. You may agree or disagree with those cultural framings of the rich and the afflicted, and I'm not declaring a debate on that. I'm just levying all this to say again. I'm levying all this to say again in today's Gospel of Luke. Jesus stands on a Palestinian prairie and says, "Not so fast." And he flips the world on its head. Here Jesus says in no uncertain terms something radically different. Blessed are the poor, and woe to the rich. His words, verbatim. Blessed for the poor and the afflicted and the suffering. Woe to the rich and the comfortable and the full. Before I go any further, I need to clarify what the word blessed or blessed can mean. According to one New Testament scholar, blessed means satisfied or even favored. That's what best describes the Greek word makarios here. If someone was makarios as their descriptor, in Greek mythology, they were favored ones by the gods. So when Jesus says, "Blessed are the," that same scholar warns us to be careful that we don't equate blessed with saved and woe with damned. This isn't about who is going to heaven and who is going to hell. But this is likely of the sentiment of receiving divine favor or belovedness from God. So Jesus is making a theological, social statement here, flipping the way that we value and adore and frame people according to their station in life. Jesus is challenging his disciples to give our loving and favorable attention differently than the world does. Why do you think he's doing this? Why do you think he does this? In many ways, I'm asking that genuinely and inviting you just to exist with that question. Why is Jesus doing this? I'm sure there are many answers. But I think it's because he wants to get us, especially his followers, to view the poor, the suffering, and the downtrodden with more compassion. Don't so much obsess about the rich and fortunate, and don't automatically assume that they are God's favored ones. Rather, I think Jesus is asking us to try doing the opposite. Try seeing the weakest, the most reviled in society, the suffering and the poorest among us as the beloved. Jesus wants our attention on those who get little attention. And you know what? He wants this especially from his followers. What does it say in verse 20 before he goes on this litany of blessing and woes? He looked up at his disciples and he said these things. So he's got a crowd of people in front of him that he's preaching to. And he zeroes in on his followers. And he says these things. With this sermon, Jesus is calling us, Christians, to a radical way of seeing and being in the world. If we want to be his followers, that involves viewing people on the margins and people under the heel of society with reverence. They are the Makarios. That's how a follower of Jesus is to view the world. And it's not a comfortable message from Jesus to scrutinize the rich and powerful and to focus blessing and favor on the poor, ignored, and bullied. But boy, it does seem clear. With this radical message and sermon, Jesus reminds us that his movement, that this religion, goes beyond merely forgiving sins and soothing consciences. And those are big deals. Those are pillars of our faith. Forgiveness of sins and soothing consciences and setting us free from guilt and shame. Those are pillars of the faith. But he's also reminding us that he, and therefore we, are also here to challenge systems that cause our neighbors harm. Make no mistake, the Roman Empire didn't give Jesus a public execution because he forgave sins. They killed him because he challenged power and because he wanted to turn the world's value systems on their heads. Starting right here in the Sermon on the Plain, where he redefines who deserves blessing and belovedness and who deserves scrutiny and criticism. They killed Jesus because of stunning messages like this. Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who are hungry. Blessed are you who weep. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you and revile you and defame you. But woe to you who are rich. Woe to you who are full. Woe to those who are powerful and do nothing for those who are hurt. In today's gospel, Jesus stands on a Palestinian prairie and he flips the world on its head. And as he did so, he was looking right at his disciples, right at his followers, right at you and me. Amen.